My name is Victoria. I am 34 years old, and I never imagined that my life could shatter in the space of one email. It was barely 6 in the morning when I unlocked my office computer. The Boise sky was still dark, the building mostly silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights above. I wanted to arrive early to catch up after 3 days away. 3 days spent at my father's funeral, standing in the autumn air, clutching a folded flag as if it could keep me from collapsing. I logged in and there it was. A single subject line: clear your desk by the end of the day. I stared at it, waiting for my tired eyes to trick me, but the words sharpened instead. The email continued with a hollow corporate tone, as if my father's death had been nothing more than a hobby I chose over spreadsheets. "We need people who prioritize their work," it read. My pulse thundered in my ears. 3 days. 3 days of bereavement leave that had been approved, stamped, and signed. I whispered the words aloud, my throat dry. Approved leave. Now termination. The email carried the weight of finality. Human resources would handle paperwork. I was dismissed effective immediately. 5 years of loyalty, of late nights and endless weekends, reduced to a cold paragraph on a screen. I leaned back in my leather chair, its squeak too loud in the silence, and tried to steady my breath. In front of me stood the cactus my team gave me last Christmas, small but stubbornly alive. A photo of us together at the retreat. Thank you notes from the people I'd mentored. They stared back at me like ghosts. This was my reward for building the highest performing division at Summit Edge Logistics. This was what I had earned after dedicating a quarter of my life. And yet, I did not cry. Grief was already inside me from burying my father. Anger tried to surface, but even that felt muted, like a storm that had drained itself dry. Instead, I reached for my phone, took a photo of the email, and sent it to my personal account. I knew instinctively this moment would matter later, though I could not yet see how. I closed my laptop, my movements slow and deliberate. If they wanted me gone, I would leave with dignity. I pulled a box from under my desk, began placing items inside one by one, as if packing pieces of my soul. The office smelled faintly of coffee drifting from another floor. I imagined my father's voice steady like the river where he once taught me to fish. "Be the rock, Victoria. Stay steady while the water rushes past." The irony cut deep. He had taught me resilience, and now, barely a week after losing him, I was being punished for mourning him. Outside, the faint light of dawn began spilling over the city. I sat in that half-lit room, my hands trembling as they wrapped newspaper around a small cactus. 5 years condensed into a cardboard box. 5 years treated as disposable. I lifted my head, staring at the ceiling, and made a silent promise. I would not fight with tears. I would not beg to stay. But I would never forget this betrayal. And one day Summit Edge would remember that email. That was how it all began, the morning my career ended, with a single line on a screen, the same morning my life truly started over. I had just placed the last photo frame into the box when I heard footsteps approaching. The clock on the wall still read 7:30. The office was usually quiet until 9. Tanya from accounting appeared in the doorway, her eyes falling on the half-packed box, her expression shifting instantly from curiosity to shock. "Victoria, what's happening?" she asked, her voice low. I swallowed, pressing the tape across the cardboard. "I've been let go." Her brow furrowed. Why you just closed the Newbrook merger last month? Profits are up because of your planning." I gave her a tired smile. Apparently taking 3 days of approved leave to bury my father isn't the kind of commitment this company values. Tanya's face burned, red outrage flashing in her eyes. She muttered something under her breath about Dan, my supervisor, the man who had signed my leave form only a week before. More colleagues began to arrive. One by one, their gazes landed on me, on the cactus wrapped in paper, on the cardboard box, swallowing the remnants of my career. Whispered conversations filled the room, confusion rippling through the floor like electricity. By 8:30, Jason from my team strode in. He was always the one with a grin, the one who made Monday mornings survivable. But when I told him what happened, his smile vanished, as if I had struck it off his face. "This is bull," he started, his voice rising. I shook my head. "Jason, it's done. Dan made his choice." "But you carried this team for 5 years," he shot back. "You built us. You trained every one of us. You're the reason we survived the Henderson chaos last quarter. His voice carried across the room. Suddenly, more of my team members gathered around Ethan, Veronica, Louise, Diane, Gabriella, Kayla. 7 of them in total. My core team. The ones I had bled hours for stayed late nights, with mentored through promotions. They stood in silence, forming a circle around me. Veronica's eyes welled with tears. Ethan's fists clenched. The air felt heavy, like a storm pressing against the walls. You can't leave, Veronica whispered. The Wilson renewal is next week. The Hernandez contract is still in negotiations. None of us knows the systems the way you do. I sealed the box with a firm pull of tape. Dan should have thought of that before firing me for attending my father's funeral. The words hung there like an unspoken verdict. Then a sharp voice sliced through the tension. Everyone back to your desks, now. We turned to see Dan himself standing a few feet away, arms crossed, a disapproving frown etched deep into his thin face. His tone carried the authority of someone who believed loyalty was obedience, not respect. No one moved. For a moment, I thought Ethan might actually hit him. Jason's jaw tightened. Veronica wiped her tears but did not step away. Now Dan repeated louder this time. Slowly, reluctantly, my team dispersed, but not before each of them gave me a look. Defiance, grief, solidarity. Silent messages passed between us. This isn't over. Dan stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the words would sting less in a whisper. This could have been handled with discretion if you had waited until the end of the day to pack up. I met his eyes steady and unflinching, like the discretion you showed when you fired me by email after approving my bereavement leave. His jaw flexed. He tried to justify it, something about business needs shifting priorities, but I cut him off with a quiet warning. Don't finish that sentence, Dan. Not with my father's death still fresh. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his expression. Uncertainty. Then it vanished, replaced by the usual cold professionalism. Human resources is expecting you. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be. I lifted the box, my arms shaking under its weight. Don't worry, I won't make a scene. But remember this moment. You might need to someday. As I walked toward HR, my team watched me go. Their eyes followed me until I disappeared through the glass doors. I gave them one last small smile, my final act as their leader. Outside, the Boise sky had brightened, but my world felt darker than ever. Still, a strange calm settled in my chest. They could take my job, they could strip away my title, but they could not erase my dignity or the loyalty of the people I had led. That was when it hit me. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something else, though I could not yet see what. And if you are listening right now, ask yourself this. Have you ever faced a moment where the people in power made you feel disposable, like your humanity did not matter? Share your story in the comments below. I want to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Because this was only the first chapter. The walk to human resources felt longer than any journey I had ever made in that building. Each step echoed against the polished floors like a drumbeat announcing my exile. When I entered the sterile white office, Barbara Kent, the HR representative, looked up from her desk. She had only been with the company for 6 months. Her expression carried polite sympathy, the kind you offer to a stranger at a bus stop, not to someone being discarded after 5 years of service. I'm sorry about this, Victoria, she said, gently sliding papers across the desk. And I'm very sorry about your father. I nodded, but my eyes fixed on the documents. Standard severance, 2 weeks' pay, a non-disparagement clause, and a reminder of my non-compete agreement that barred me from working for competitors for 6 months within a 300-mile radius. In other words, leave the industry or vanish. I glanced at Barbara. Is there anything you can tell me? Any reason why this happened? She hesitated. Her pen hovered above the legal pad. It does seem abrupt. Wordlessly, I pulled out my phone and showed her the email. Her eyes widened. This is it. No performance warnings, no improvement plan, just an email. Yes, I answered quietly. 3 days of approved leave, and now this. Her professional mask cracked for a second. She scribbled a note, then excused herself to check with legal. I sat there staring out the window at the Boise River cutting through the city. My father used to fish there. I could almost hear him beside me whispering the words, he had always repeated. The river moves, but the rocks stay steady. Be like the rocks. When Barbara returned 20 minutes later, her face had hardened into corporate neutrality. Unfortunately, Idaho is an at-will employment state. The company is within its rights. I understand, I said, signing the papers. My voice was calm even. Inside, I felt something shifting, resolve, not rage. Summit Edge can do whatever it wants, and so can I. Her eyes flickered with something unspoken. She leaned closer, voice low. Off the record, this isn't right. If you wanted to pursue action, I cut her off. I don't want to sue. I want to move forward. I gathered the papers and my box and left without looking back. The September air outside was warm against my face. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel, letting the silence settle around me. Then one by one my phone buzzed with messages. Jason, this is wrong. What can we do, Veronica? Are you okay? Can we meet later? Ethan Dan is a spineless jerk. We're furious. The texts poured in, each one carrying outrage and loyalty. These people were not just colleagues, they were my family in every way that mattered. I realized then that Dan had fired more than just an employee. He had sparked something larger, something that could not be contained in a policy handbook. As the notifications kept coming, I closed my eyes and breathed. I would not rush. I would not retaliate recklessly. I would be patient, steady, like the rocks my father spoke of. A plan was beginning to take shape, though it was still blurry at the edges. Moments later, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a deep voice filled my ear. Victoria, this is Hank Fleming, CEO of Vertex Transport Systems. My heart jolted. Vertex, the largest competitor to Summit Edge, the name whispered in every boardroom. I had met Hank once at a logistics conference. He had tried to recruit me then, but I was loyal to my team, to the company I believed in. Word travels fast, Hank said. I heard what happened. I want you on my team. We're expanding Pacific Northwest operations, and I need someone with your expertise. My fingers tightened around the phone. Division director, a step above my current role, more responsibility, more pay, more authority. The exact opportunity I had dreamed of handed to me on the very day my old life had crumbled. But my first thought was of my team, 7 loyal people who had stood by me even as Dan tried to erase me. I told Hank I would think about it. He respected that, gave me the weekend, promised their legal team would handle any issues with my non-compete. I hung up, staring at the phone in disbelief. The river was moving fast now, but maybe I was ready to stand firm. And if you were in my shoes, if the company you gave your heart to discarded you the moment you showed your humanity, would you stay quiet, or would you walk away to start again? Tell me in the comments what you would do, because sometimes it's the hardest choices that define who we really are. Saturday morning arrived with an unusual heaviness. I had hardly slept, my mind spinning between grief for my father and the storm that was brewing inside Summit Edge. By the time the sun lifted over the Boise skyline, I already had a dozen new messages from my former team. Jason's text hit me first. Dan just called an emergency meeting. He never does that. Then Veronica. Everyone is furious. Nobody knows where the Henderson proposal files are stored. The office is chaos. And Ethan, blunt as ever, we're not staying here without you. I read the words again and again, each one pressing against the fragile calm I had tried to build. My team, the people I had led through mergers, expansions, endless nights of planning, they were unraveling without direction. And it wasn't pride that stirred inside me, it was sorrow. I had spent years creating a system where they thrived. Dan had destroyed that in less than 24 hours. Later that afternoon, I met Veronica and Jason at a small pub tucked away from downtown. Riverfront brewing smelled of hops and wood smoke, and its dim lighting gave us the illusion of privacy. When I walked in, they stood immediately. Their eyes were heavy, their shoulders tight with anger. "How are you holding up?" Veronica asked softly, sliding into the booth. "I'm all right," I replied. The truth was more complicated, but I wouldn't weigh them down with my turmoil. It's been a hard few weeks, but I'll land on my feet. Jason snorted, pounding his fist lightly on the table. Dan is a fool. The office is in shambles. He's trying to shuffle your workload onto everyone else without compensation. People are terrified. If they can fire you, their top team lead, after 5 years, what chance does anyone else have? Veronica leaned closer, Paula's been asking questions. The regional manager looks worried. Nobody can believe Dan handled it this way. I listened quietly, sipping water, watching them. Anger pulsed through their words, but underneath there was something deeper. Fear, betrayal. They had seen their mentor cut down, and now they wondered if they were next. Then Jason asked the question that had been simmering between us since I walked through the door. What will you do now? I hesitated, feeling the weight of the choice pressing against me. I had not yet told them about Vertex, but the truth slipped out in a whisper. I've had an offer. Their eyes widened instantly, where Veronica demanded. Vertex, I admitted. For a long moment the table was silent except for the low hum of conversation around us. Then Jason laughed short and sharp. Of course, the one company that could use your brilliance. Veronica reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. Non-competes don't always hold. Not if they fired you without cause. You could fight it. You should. I nodded, though uncertainty still clung to me. Their legal team says the same, but it's still a risk. Jason's phone buzzed, interrupting us. He frowned as he read the screen. Dan just scheduled the emergency meeting for tomorrow morning, Saturday. He's panicking about the Wilson account. No one can find your analysis files. A flicker of satisfaction moved through me. Those files were exactly where they belonged, carefully stored on the server. But my system was unique, my structure not obvious to anyone else. It wasn't revenge, it was competence. They had stripped away the person who held the map, and now they were lost. I stood gathering my purse. I should get going. I have an early appointment tomorrow. Jason caught my eye. Victoria, if you did go to Vertex, hypothetically, would they be hiring? I paused, studying him, then glanced at Veronica. Their faces carried the same determination I had seen that morning in the office. Loyalty had transformed into defiance. Hypothetically, I said carefully, yes. They're expanding rapidly. The look they exchanged told me everything. It wasn't just me Dan had pushed away. It was all of us. As I left the pub, the night air cool against my face, I thought about what had just happened. My team was not waiting for Summit Edge to collapse. They were already planning their escape. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. Sunday morning broke with a gray sky, the kind that promised rain, but never delivered. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the email threads my team had forwarded to me. Summit Edge was unraveling faster than I had expected. Dan had pushed everyone into emergency overtime, demanding they cover my responsibilities without guidance or compensation. The Wilson account renewal was hanging by a thread. Clients were already asking why I wasn't there. By mid-morning, I found myself in the office of Vincent Torres, an employment lawyer a friend had recommended. His office was lined with diplomas and shelves of heavy law books. He greeted me with a firm handshake, then invited me to tell him everything. I slid my phone across the desk, the termination email glowing on the screen. He read it slowly, then removed his glasses, rubbing his forehead. This, he said finally, is textbook wrongful termination. Firing someone for taking approved bereavement leave can be argued as both a breach of contract and a violation of good faith. I leaned forward. I'm not interested in suing. I just need clarity about my non-compete. He flipped through the contract. 6 months, 300 miles. That essentially bars you from the entire region. Courts don't like this kind of restriction, especially when the employer acts in bad faith. They terminated you for attending your father's funeral. That matters. Is it enforceable? I pressed. In Idaho, unlikely. Summit Edge would have to prove that you're causing them measurable harm, and given they fired you, that argument falls apart. I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders. For the first time since receiving that email, I felt the possibility of freedom. Vincent leaned back, studying me. What's your plan, Victoria? Vertex has offered me a position, division director. Better pay, better authority. His lips curved into a small smile. Then take it. Don't let this contract stop you. Sometimes the law only matters when you let fear silence you. I left his office with the papers tucked into my bag, the Boise air crisp with the scent of pine. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the day, Jason reporting that the emergency Saturday meeting had been chaos, Veronica saying Dan had raised his voice in front of Paula Ethan, swearing that morale was collapsing. By Sunday evening, I knew my decision. I picked up the phone and called Hank Fleming. I accept your offer, I told him, but I have one condition. Name it, Hank replied. My team. If they apply, I want them to be considered fairly. There was a pause, then a chuckle. If they're half as talented as you, we'd be lucky to have them. That afternoon, I signed the contract with Vertex, Division Director of Pacific Northwest Operations. The salary was 40% higher than what I had made at Summit Edge. Better benefits, a sign-on bonus. But none of that compared to the sense of justice filling my chest. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who had been silenced, discarded, or punished for being human. The next day, my phone lit up with messages from all 7 of my former team members. They wanted to meet for coffee. They wanted to talk about the future. When I walked into that cafe and saw their faces, I realized that loyalty can survive the worst betrayals. They weren't just following me, they were ready to fight beside me. And maybe you're listening right now, wondering what you'd do in my place. Would you take the risk? Would you step into the unknown for the chance at something better? If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and join me here every week. Because we're not just sharing stories, we're building a community that believes in dignity and resilience. The river was moving swiftly, but for the first time in weeks, I felt steady, like the rocks my father had taught me to be. Tuesday morning, I sat alone in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. The smell of roasted beans lingered in the air, warm and grounding, but my heart raced with anticipation. Jason arrived first. His usual upbeat stride slowed into something heavy. Veronica followed, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept. One by one, the others appeared, Ethan, Louise, Diane, Gabriella, Kayla, until 2 tables had to be pushed together. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. Ethan leaned forward, his voice hard. Summit Edge is imploding. Dan is micromanaging every move. Paula is breathing down his neck, and clients are starting to panic. Veronica added quickly, the Wilson account is threatening to pull out. They wanted to know why you weren't handling their renewal. I listened, sipping my coffee. Every detail they shared confirmed what I had suspected. Summit Edge hadn't just lost me, they had lost stability itself. My systems, my planning, my leadership. Dan thought those could be replaced, but what he didn't understand was that leadership isn't a spreadsheet. It's trust. Jason leaned in. We heard you've accepted Vertex's offer. I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I start next week. The room seemed to freeze. They exchanged glances, the weight of unspoken thoughts passing between them. Finally, Veronica broke the silence. We want to come with you. I stared at her, then looked around at the others. Every head nodded in agreement. You all have good positions at Summit Edge, I said slowly. Secure jobs. Are you sure you want to risk that? Louise laughed bitterly. Secure. They fired you for going to your father's funeral. If they can do that to you, none of us are safe. Gabriella reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of papers. We already applied, all 7 of us, yesterday. I blinked, stunned. Before you even talked to me. Kayla spoke softly but firmly. We trust you, Victoria. Where you go, we go. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Gratitude swelled in my chest, almost overwhelming. I had thought they might scatter after my departure, look out for themselves. Instead, they had chosen unity. They weren't just following me out of loyalty, they were choosing a future together. We sat there for hours, planning next steps, whispering strategies over cups of lukewarm coffee. They told me how Dan had called the Saturday meeting, how he tried to shift all my responsibilities onto them, barking orders without offering direction. How Paula looked increasingly uncomfortable as client after client raised concerns. Ethan said quietly, "They're bleeding out, Victoria. Every move Dan makes just digs the wound deeper." I thought about the cactus sitting on my new windowsill at home, rescued from my old desk. Even in the harshest conditions, it survived. And here they were, 7 people choosing to survive with me, even if it meant uprooting their lives. By the time we stood to leave, I felt something I hadn't felt since my father's funeral. Hope. Not just for myself, but for all of us. Outside the city buzzed with late morning traffic, but we lingered on the sidewalk, reluctant to part. Jason looked at me, his jaw set. Whatever happens next, we're ready. I nodded. Then let's be steady. Let's outlast the storm. As they walked away in pairs, I stood alone watching them disappear into the crowd. Summit Edge had lost its foundation the moment they treated me as disposable. What they didn't realize was that the foundation wasn't just me, it was all of us together. The river was rushing fast now, threatening to sweep Summit Edge away. But my team and I, we were the rocks. And for the first time, I began to believe we would build something stronger than anything we left behind. The following Monday began with a phone call I half expected and half dreaded. The screen lit up with the name Paula McCormack, Regional Manager of Summit Edge. Her voice was controlled, but beneath the surface I could hear something tight, almost desperate. "Victoria," she began, "we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair at Vertex's office where the Boise skyline stretched beyond the glass. "Good morning, Paula. What can I do for you?" There was a pause before she answered. "I've just received 7 resignation letters, all from your former team, all effective immediately." Her voice hardened. "Care to explain?" I inhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch. "I don't work for Summit Edge anymore. Their decisions are their own." Her tone sharpened. "They're all going to Vertex, where you just started as division director. This doesn't look coincidental." "People make career choices for many reasons," I said evenly. "Perhaps you should ask Dan why your top-performing team walked out together?" Paula exhaled the sound heavy through the line. "This is about your termination, isn't it? I've reviewed what happened. Dan didn't consult me. I would never have approved it." "That's between you and him," I replied. Though it's curious that a decision that drastic was made without the regional manager's involvement. For the first time, her voice cracked. I trusted his judgment. Clearly that was a mistake. Silence pressed between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she said, "I'm prepared to offer you your position back, a 10% raise, a formal apology. We need your expertise. The Wilson account is threatening to walk." I closed my eyes for a moment. The old me might have felt vindicated, might have considered it. But I wasn't the same woman who had been humiliated by a cold email 2 weeks ago. "I appreciate the offer," I said calmly, "but I've accepted a position elsewhere." She pushed harder. "We'll match whatever they're paying plus 15%. "It's not about the money." "Then what would it take?" she asked, almost pleading now. 7 key employees leaving at once is devastating. The operational knowledge alone. I cut her off. "It would take time travel, Paula. Going back to when my father died and someone at Summit Edge showing basic human decency instead of punishing me for grieving." The line went quiet. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I ended it. "I need to go. I have a new position to start today, and I don't want to be late." She made one final attempt. "Your non-compete? Feel free to have your legal team contact mine," I replied, my voice steel. "But you might want to review the circumstances of my termination first." I hung up before she could answer. Setting my phone down, I stared at the skyline, at the endless stretch of possibility waiting beyond those windows. Summit Edge was clawing to hold on, but the truth was they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. That afternoon, Hank stopped by my new office. "We're considering all 7 of your former colleagues," he said with a grin. "Their qualifications are strong. Interviews start Wednesday." Relief spread through me like sunlight. "Thank you for giving them a fair chance." "Fair chance," Hank chuckled. "They're top talent. Summit Edge's mistake is our gain." I smiled, knowing that my team's future was beginning to take shape. If you were in my place, would you have answered Paula differently? Would you have taken the raise, the apology, the offer to return to familiar ground? Or would you, like me, have chosen to walk forward, no matter the risk? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. I really want to know how you'd handle it. Because sometimes the hardest part of moving on isn't the risk ahead, it's refusing to look back. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a name I hadn't expected: Barbara Kent, the HR representative, who had handed me my severance papers not long ago. Her voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. "I shouldn't be telling you this, Victoria," she began, "but Dan Weaver has been placed on administrative leave. Paula has launched an internal review, and the board is involved. They're investigating management practices, especially around bereavement and time-off policies." For a moment, I simply sat at my desk at Vertex, staring out the window at the river glinting under the afternoon sun. Justice had begun to stir, not because I demanded it, but because Summit Edge's own arrogance had pulled it down. Barbara continued, her tone sharper now. "Your termination set off alarms. Losing an entire specialized team to a competitor. The The directors couldn't ignore that. They're reviewing every termination from the past year. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Finally, I thought. Not for me alone, but for everyone else who might have been treated like I was disposable when grief or humanity interrupted profits. Thank you, Barbara, I said softly. Not for breaking protocol, but for letting me know that truth still matters. Later that evening, I met my team again. This time it wasn't in secret. We gathered at a cozy Italian restaurant near the river, our laughter mingling with the sound of clinking glasses and soft piano music. We celebrated quietly, knowing interviews at Vertex were scheduled for the week. Jason raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said. And to Victoria, Veronica added, who taught us what real leadership looks like? I felt my throat tighten, emotion rising. But I raised my glass anyway. To us, to survival, and to building something better. The following Friday, all 7 of my former team members received and accepted offers from Vertex. That night we met again, not in sorrow, but in triumph. It was strange, almost surreal, to watch their faces glowing with excitement. For the first time in weeks, the grief weighing on me lifted just a little. As we ate and laughed, my phone buzzed with a new notification. An email from Summit Edge. I opened it with steady hands. It was a formal letter acknowledging wrongful termination, along with a settlement to avoid litigation. I accepted it not because of the money, but because it was an admission. A written confession that they had been wrong. And then the final blow landed. News spread that the Wilson account had signed with Vertex following me and my team. The Hernandez contract wasn't far behind. I looked around at the people sitting beside me, Jason cracking jokes, Veronica smiling through tears, Ethan actually laughing for once. My heart swelled with pride. Summit Edge thought they had erased me, but in trying to break me, they had unleashed something stronger than they ever imagined. The next week I stood in Vertex's largest conference room presenting quarterly results. 30% growth. 4 major client acquisitions, 3 of them former Summit Edge accounts. Efficiency improved by 22%. Hank beamed at me from the head of the table. Exceptional work, Victoria. You and your team have exceeded every projection. I glanced at my colleagues, my family, each of them thriving, finally receiving the recognition they deserved. We had proven beyond any doubt that success comes not from fear or control, but from loyalty and respect. That night as I drove home, I thought again of my father's words. The river moves, but the rocks stay steady. Summit Edge was being carried away by its own current of greed and arrogance. But we had chosen to stand firm. And from that steadiness, we had built something indestructible. 3 months later, I stood at the front of Vertex's largest conference room. The room buzzed with anticipation as executives flipped through reports, eyes widening at the numbers they were about to hear. I clicked to the final slide and let the results speak for themselves. 30% growth in our division, 4 major client acquisitions, 3 of them previously tied to Summit Edge. Operational efficiency improved by 22%. The room erupted in murmurs. Hank, seated at the head of the table, leaned back with a satisfied grin. Exceptional work, Victoria. You and your team have exceeded every projection. I nodded, though my voice caught for a second. The credit belongs to the team. They've been remarkable. Later, when I returned to my office, I found all 7 of them waiting with a cake. Jason held it up proudly. It's been exactly 3 months since we jumped ship together. We're calling it our Independence Day. I laughed, shaking my head. You're all ridiculous, but I'm grateful. Veronica smiled. Seriously, Victoria, everyone's thriving here. We're not just surviving anymore, we're building. And she was right. Each of them had grown. Jason was leading his own projects. Veronica had revolutionized client relations, earning recognition across the company. The others had stepped into roles that finally gave them autonomy and respect. They were no longer pawns in Dan's power games. They were professionals trusted and valued. That evening, as we celebrated, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Summit Edge announces restructuring amid client exodus. I held up the phone. Look at this. Ethan whistled. I heard they lost the Hernandez contract last week. That's 20% of their Pacific Northwest revenue gone. Louise added, Dan's gone. Cleared out his office Friday. Paula's scrambling to hold the pieces together. For a long moment I said nothing. A wave of satisfaction washed through me, but it wasn't the gloating kind. It was justice, clean, undeniable justice. They had tried to bury me, and instead, they buried themselves. I raised my glass of water to Summit Edge. May they finally learn that a company is only as strong as how it treats its people. The table erupted in cheers. Yet even as we laughed, even as I savored this victory, something inside me stirred. A question I couldn't quite silence. Was this the end of the story? Or was it only the beginning of something larger? Because when a company falls apart this quickly, when leaders are exposed for what they truly are, secrets have a way of bubbling to the surface. And I was about to learn that not everything about Summit Edge's collapse had been revealed. Sometimes the storm you think is over is just the calm before something even bigger. If you've been with me this far, stay with me because what happened next will make everything before look like a whisper compared to the roar that followed. The headlines came faster than I could process them. Within weeks, Summit Edge was unraveling at a pace that shocked even me. Clients were leaving in waves. The Wilson account had already followed us to Vertex. Then came Hernandez, then two smaller contracts that no one had expected would walk away. One by one, they slipped through Dan and Paula's fingers. The news stories used words like mass exodus, internal collapse, toxic culture exposed. To the outside world, it looked like a company stumbling under the weight of mismanagement. To me, it looked like the inevitable consequence of arrogance. And yet I didn't feel triumphant, not really. As I watched from the stability of Vertex, I felt something closer to clarity. Summit Edge wasn't failing because I left. It was failing because it had built itself on fear instead of trust, on control instead of leadership. At Vertex, things couldn't have been more different. Hank gave me freedom to design the division the way I saw fit. My team was empowered, making decisions without fear of punishment. Clients noticed. They commented on the difference how responsive and human our approach felt. Numbers proved it too. Growth was steady and morale was higher than ever. One afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Barbara Kent again. She wrote, "The board is reviewing every termination from the last 2 years. They're finding patterns, people let go without cause, policies abused. You weren't the only one." I stared at that message for a long time. My firing had cracked something open, and through that crack, light was pouring in. That night over dinner with my team, Ethan told me Paula had been calling former employees, trying to understand why loyalty had eroded so completely. Diane laughed, shaking her head. Too late for that. Still, a part of me wondered if Summit Edge had chosen differently, if they had honored the people who built their success, instead of punishing them. Would things look different now? As I sat with that thought, Jason leaned across the table. "Victoria, do you ever regret not suing them? You probably could have taken them for everything." I paused, thinking carefully. No. Revenge doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so much better that the old system becomes irrelevant. My team nodded, but I could see curiosity flickering in their eyes. They wanted to know if I ever felt the sting of what I'd lost, the title, the years, the stability I once thought I had. Of course I felt it, I admitted. I still do. But look around. We're thriving here. We're finally being seen for who we are. Jason grinned. Fair enough. And let me ask you, if you were sitting in my chair right now, would you have chosen differently? Would you have gone after Summit Edge with lawsuits, or walked away quietly to build something better? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to know if you believe silence can sometimes speak louder than noise. Because what I didn't know at that moment was that silence was about to be broken. Something far bigger than contracts, bigger than resignations, was waiting just around the corner. And when it hit, it would prove once and for all whether my choice to walk away had been strength or a mistake. The investigation into Summit Edge deepened with every passing week. What had started as whispers about poor management soon became full-blown headlines. Articles appeared in industry magazines detailing how the company mishandled bereavement policies, how employees were pushed beyond their limits, how leadership failed to value the very people who carried the business on their backs. Barbara kept me updated quietly, her emails brief but loaded with weight. The board is furious. They're finding termination cases that mirror yours. People let go for flimsy reasons, no documentation, no warning. Your situation opened the floodgates. Paula, the regional manager, tried to keep the ship afloat, but cracks showed quickly. Word reached me through former colleagues that she was visibly unraveling in meetings. Clients were demanding answers. The board wanted explanations she couldn't provide. Within 2 months, Paula announced her resignation. She claimed it was voluntary, but everyone knew the truth. Summit Edge had lost faith in its leadership. Meanwhile, Dan was still on administrative leave. In reality, he was finished. His name had become a warning in the industry, a shorthand for arrogance and cruelty. No one wanted to touch him. On the other side of the river at Vertex, the story was starkly different. The division I led was thriving. We had not only secured the Wilson and Hernandez accounts, but added 3 more clients who had been quietly dissatisfied with Summit Edge for years. Growth charts climbed steadily upward. Morale surveys came back glowing. One Friday morning, Hank walked into my office with a smile. "Victoria, I just came from the executive meeting. Your division isn't just performing well, it's outperforming every other region in the company. 30% growth in 3 months. You've set a new standard." I let out a slow breath, feeling pride ripple through me. "It's not just me, Hank. It's the team. They carried this." He nodded. "That's what leadership is, building people who can carry the weight with you. You've done that here." That weekend, my team and I gathered again, not in secret this time, but openly celebrating at a riverside restaurant. Veronica lifted her glass, to new beginnings and to finally being valued. I watched their faces glowing in the candlelight, Jason laughing. Ethan relaxed for once, Kayla leaning into a joke from Diane. They looked free, not afraid of the next mistake that might cost them everything, but confident, motivated, alive. And yet I couldn't help but think of the people still trapped inside Summit Edge. The employees who hadn't been able to leave, who were watching the company crumble around them. I hoped that the investigation would bring change, even if too late. One evening not long after, as I was driving home, I saw the Boise River shimmering in the dusk. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "The river moves, but the rocks stay steady. Be like the rocks." I realized then that I had done exactly that. Summit Edge had been swept away in the current of its own greed and short-sightedness. But my team and I, we had stood steady, and because of that, we had built something unshakable. Still a thought lingered as I parked the car that night. The collapse of Summit Edge wasn't finished yet. There were deeper consequences coming, ones that would ripple far beyond what any of us could see. And those ripples were about to reach me in ways I hadn't expected. 6 months after I had walked out of Summit Edge with a cardboard box in my arms, an unexpected message arrived in my inbox. The sender's name made me stop cold. Paula McCormack. She wanted to meet for lunch. For a long moment I debated ignoring it. Paula had been part of the system that failed me, that failed so many. Yet curiosity tugged at me. Something in her message, brief, almost pleading, suggested this wasn't about business. We met at a small restaurant overlooking the Boise River. I arrived first, and as I watched the water move steadily past the rocks, I remembered my father's voice. "Be steady, Victoria. Don't let the current carry you away." When Paula walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The sharp lines of stress that had once carved into her face were softer now. She looked tired, but in a way that carried humility instead of arrogance. "Thank you for coming," she began, sliding into the seat across from me. I nodded cautiously. "What is this about Paula?" She folded her hands, staring down for a moment before meeting my eyes. I wanted to apologize. Properly. I raised an eyebrow. "You weren't the one who fired me." "No," she admitted. "But I created the environment where it could happen. I let Dan make decisions without oversight. I trusted him when I should have questioned him. After you and your team left everything unraveled, the board brought in consultants to evaluate what went wrong. The report wasn't flattering." I studied her face. She meant it. For once, Paula wasn't spinning or managing perception, she was admitting failure. She sighed. "Summit Edge is being acquired by Meridian Shipping, at a fraction of its valuation. They're buying assets and client lists, nothing more. The company we knew is gone." I wasn't surprised. By then, Vertex had already absorbed 3 of their largest clients. Summit Edge had been bleeding for months. "And Dan?" I asked. Her lips tightened. "Still unemployed. His reputation is ruined. No one in the industry will touch him. Silence stretched between us as I absorbed her words. Finally, Paula leaned forward. I've joined a consulting firm now. We specialize in organizational culture. I'm trying to help other companies avoid the mistakes we made. There was something almost fragile in her tone, as if she were asking me to believe that redemption was possible. I nodded slowly. Good. People deserve better than what Summit Edge gave them. We finished our meal quietly. As I prepared to leave, Paula asked the question I sensed had been burning in her mind all along. Was it worth it, Victoria, walking away, instead of fighting, staying silent, instead of suing? I thought of my team thriving at Vertex, of the clients who had followed us, grateful for respect and stability, of the cactus on my windowsill rescued and still alive, a symbol of endurance. Yes, I said simply, the results speak for themselves. Paula lowered her gaze, then gave a small nod. I hope one day I'll be able to say the same. I walked out into the afternoon light, the Boise River gleaming in the distance. My father's words echoed again, steady and timeless. The rocks remained even as the current swallowed everything else. But here's the thing. Sometimes you think the current has slowed only to realize it's pulling something even larger downstream. What happened after that lunch meeting would prove that my story with Summit Edge wasn't quite finished. If you're still with me, don't miss what comes next. The twist I'm about to share changed everything once more in ways I never could have imagined. 1 year after the email that had shattered my world, I stood on the stage of Vertex's annual leadership conference. The lights were bright, the room packed with executives, managers, and employees from across the region. As I adjusted the microphone, I felt a swell of emotions I could hardly contain. Ladies and gentlemen, I began when I joined Vertex 1 year ago. I was carrying a box of belongings out of Summit Edge, unsure of what the future held. Today I stand here as the Executive Vice President of Operations for the entire Northwest region. Applause rose thunderous and warm. I paused, letting the moment sink in, then added, "This achievement isn't mine alone. It belongs to the incredible team who chose to walk with me, who believed we could build something better." From the front row, I saw Jason, Veronica, Ethan, Diane, Gabriella Louise, and Kayla smiling, their faces beaming with pride. Each of them had risen since joining Vertex. Jason now led his own division. Veronica had transformed client relations, earning industry recognition. Ethan had streamlined logistics in ways that saved millions. The others had stepped into leadership roles they had long been denied at Summit Edge. We had grown together, and now the entire company saw what we were capable of. After the conference, my team surprised me again. They gathered in my office with balloons and champagne, laughing like we hadn't laughed in months. Jason raised a glass. To us. To proving them wrong. Veronica added, her eyes shining. And to Victoria, who showed us that leadership means more than titles or paychecks. It means believing in people. I smiled, though my throat was tight. No, it means building something that lasts. And that's what we've done here. That evening, as I drove home, a notification lit up my phone. Summit Edge Logistics closes for good. The article explained that Meridian Shipping had finalized the acquisition. Summit Edge's name would vanish, its assets, absorbed, its legacy, reduced to a cautionary tale. I parked my car, sat in silence, and let the reality wash over me. The company that had once defined my career no longer existed. They had tried to break me, but instead they had destroyed themselves. The next day a package arrived at my office. Inside was the small cactus I had once packed into a cardboard box. A note was tucked beneath it. Rescued this from your old desk. Thought you might want it back now. Barbara. I placed the cactus on my windowsill where sunlight streamed through the glass. It had grown just a little despite everything, just like me. Later, my team and I met for dinner. We laughed, toasted, and shared stories of how far we'd come. At one point, Ethan raised his glass and said, "To freedom," to proving that loyalty and dignity matter. We clinked glasses, and I felt a wave of gratitude stronger than anything I had ever known. And if you've been listening to my story, let me ask you something. Have you ever been told you were disposable? Have you ever been treated like your humanity was less important than your productivity? If you believe that people matter more than profits, hit that subscribe button and join our community here. Because together, we can prove that respect and dignity aren't optional, they're essential. Summit Edge's name might fade, but our story was just beginning. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in tearing something down. It's in building something better and watching it thrive. 6 months after Vertex had named me executive vice president, I received a lunch invitation that caught me off guard. The sender, Paula McCormick. For a moment, I considered deleting it. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with Summit Edge or anyone connected to its downfall. But another part, the part that had always believed in facing truth rather than avoiding it, was curious. We met at a quiet restaurant near the river, the same river where my father once taught me patience. I arrived early, letting the sound of water soothe my nerves. When Paula entered, she looked different. The rigid posture, the sharp edges in her voice, they were gone. She carried herself with a humility I had never seen before. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling into the chair across from me. I studied her carefully. "Why am I here, Paula?" She sighed, her hands clasped tightly around her glass of water. "Because I owe you more than words can cover. I want to apologize fully, not the half-hearted kind. After you and your team left, everything collapsed. The board brought in outside consultants. The report was brutal. It showed exactly how toxic we had become. I was part of that. I let it happen." I remained quiet, giving her space. She looked down, then back up. "Summit Edge is gone. Meridian Shipping acquired what was left, assets, contracts, nothing more. The name has vanished. I suppose in some ways that's fitting." Her words carried no bitterness, only resignation. "And Dan?" I asked. Her mouth tightened. "Still unemployed. His reputation is ruined. I hear whispers that he tried to interview at smaller firms, but no one wants his baggage." Silence fell between us, heavy, but not hostile. For the first time, I saw Paula not as a rival or an accomplice, but as a person who had been caught in the machinery of a culture too broken to save. She leaned forward, voice softer now. "I've joined a consulting firm. We focus on organizational culture, helping companies avoid the mistakes we made. I suppose it's my way of making amends." I nodded slowly. "That's good. People deserve better than what Summit Edge gave them." Her eyes held mine. "Victoria, do you ever regret walking away instead of fighting? You could have sued. You could have destroyed them legally." I thought about my team now thriving in roles they had once only dreamed of. I thought about the clients who had followed us, who told us regularly how valued they felt. And I thought about the cactus on my office windowsill, the one that had survived the darkness of being left behind, only to flourish again in the sun. "No," I said firmly. "My revenge wasn't destroying Summit Edge. My revenge was building something better." Paula's gaze dropped, her lips pressing together as though she wanted to argue but couldn't. Finally, she whispered, "Then maybe there's still hope for me too." We finished lunch quietly, conversation drifting to lighter topics. But when we parted, she gripped my hand tightly, as though she was asking for a kind of forgiveness I wasn't sure I could give. As I walked back to my car, the river caught the sunlight, sparkling as it rushed past the rocks. My father's words echoed once again. "Be steady, Victoria. Stay like the rocks." Summit Edge was gone, swallowed by the current of its own mistakes. But I remained steady and unbroken, with a future more promising than I ever could have imagined. 1 year to the day after that cold email had shattered my world, I walked into my office at Vertex and found a small package waiting on my desk. There was no return address, only my name written in neat handwriting. Curious, I opened it. Inside was the little cactus I had once packed into a cardboard box on the worst day of my career. It was slightly larger now, healthier, as if it too had survived exile and found its place in the sun. A note was tucked beneath it. "Rescued this from your old desk. Thought you might want it back. Barbara." I set the cactus on my windowsill, sunlight pouring through the glass. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. It felt like a symbol, a quiet reminder that even the smallest things could endure cruelty and neglect and still grow stronger. That afternoon, I drove out to the Boise River, the place where my father and I used to fish. I stood on the bank as the current rushed past, steady and endless. I closed my eyes and I could almost hear his voice again. "The river moves, but the rocks stay steady. Be like the rocks." Everything came back in a rush: the humiliation of that email, the hollow emptiness of packing 5 years of my life into a box, the fury in my team's eyes when they realized what had been done, the quiet promise I made to myself not to crumble, but to endure. And now the undeniable truth: I had not only endured, I had risen higher than I ever dreamed. Summit Edge no longer existed. It had been absorbed, dismantled, and forgotten. But the story wasn't about their failure. It was about our survival. About the team that walked with me when the ground gave way beneath us. About the clients who trusted us enough to follow. About the culture we created together at Vertex, a culture built not on fear, but on respect. Standing by the river, I whispered into the wind, "You were right, Dad. Sometimes the strongest response isn't to fight, but to stay steady." I realized then that the greatest revenge had never been about punishing Dan or proving Paula wrong. It had been about building something so strong, so undeniable, that the old system became irrelevant. Our success had spoken louder than any lawsuit or confrontation ever could. If you've been with me through this journey, maybe you're carrying your own story of betrayal. Maybe you've been treated as disposable, or told that your humanity didn't matter compared to the bottom line. I want you to know this: your worth isn't defined by someone else's failure to see it. And if you're curious to see how others have turned their darkest moments into strength, you won't want to miss the next story I share. Click through to the video waiting for you. It's another tale of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate justice. And don't forget to subscribe, because this community we're building is about more than stories. It's about standing steady like the rocks, no matter how fierce the current becomes. I took one last look at the river before walking back to my car. The water flowed swiftly, carrying away the remnants of what was broken. But I remained steady with a team, a future, and a life stronger than ever before. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't in tearing down what hurt you. It's in creating something better and thriving so completely that the past can never touch you again. As the months slipped into a full year, life began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a path unfolding at its own steady pace. My days at Vertex were filled with challenges, yes, but they were the kind that stretched me, not the kind that broke me. My team thrived, our clients trusted us, and for the first time in a long while, I could breathe without the weight of fear pressing on my chest. The cactus on my windowsill became more than a plant. Each morning, as sunlight touched its spines, I saw resilience staring back at me. It reminded me that survival wasn't just about clinging on in the storm. It was about choosing to grow after the storm had passed. Sometimes when I drove by the old Summit Edge building, I felt no bitterness, only a quiet sense of closure. The sign was gone, the halls empty, but in its place lived a lesson: a company is only as strong as how it treats its people. They had forgotten that, and it had cost them everything. On weekends, I found myself returning often to the Boise River. Standing by the water, I remembered my father's laughter, his steady hand guiding mine as we cast our lines. The river moved quickly, relentless and sure, but the rocks stood firm. I understood now what he had meant all along. Life will sweep and change, but strength comes from standing steady, refusing to be moved by cruelty or fear. Looking back, I no longer saw that email as the end of something. It had been the beginning. The spark that set me free, that allowed me to create a better future, not only for myself, but for everyone who believed in me. And maybe that's the greatest truth of all. Sometimes the worst moments are only doorways. If you stay steady long enough, they open into places brighter than you ever imagined.